We are within the Licking Riverside Historic District. Its boundary to the west is Greenup Street, and we're currently at Greenup and 5th in front of 502 Greenup, which we'll be talking about in a minute. But to start off, a little bit of background history on the neighborhood. The city of Covington was founded in 1815. Of course, we had the big bicentennial last year. And 6th Street was actually its southern boundary, so we're almost to the edge of town. We're a block away from the edge of town in 1815's terms. Today we'll stay in the area that was largely undeveloped until the 1840s, so this would have been just no houses, grass, larger estates after a little while. This house is sometimes called the Hamilton House. In 1915, the house was occupied by Sally Morris, her daughter Maddie Bruce Reynolds, and Sally's brother Charles A. Withers. Sally and Charles were born to Charles A. and Matilda Withers. The Withers were prominent members of the Covington community and ardent supporters of the South, which is kind of interesting because right behind everyone there's the Methodist Episcopal Church, the Union one, because in Covington they split, so there was a Southern sympathizing one on the other side of the block, and this was the Union side, so I'm sure they made great neighbors. I can't even imagine, maybe there were some glares going on, I don't know. We're gonna do 500 Garrard. We're on Garrard Street now, which is very lovely tree-lined residential street. This is the Hearn House, and it is an Italianate style house. You can tell that because it's very rectilinear. I think they sometimes look like books on a bookshelf. You see a lot of them are very rectangular too. They have a cornice along the top that's very ornate with the brackets, and you have these long, tall, skinny, narrow windows that have different hood moldings on them at different levels. That's pretty common in Italianate architecture too. You have to change it up from floor to floor. But the really nice thing about this house is we have images of what it used to look like on Faces and Places, our photo archive, before it was lovingly restored. And it right now it's 3 condos. There are 3 units. I think there's one in the basement level. But of course, it started out as a single-family home. Jonathan D. Hearn, who was a prominent businessman, he was a banker, he was a civic leader. He constructed the house in 1874. And he was born in Bourbon County, Kentucky in 1829 and came to Covington around 1861. And he worked in the shoe business and was later the president of the Third National Bank in Cincinnati. So I guess that's what you have to do to get a house like that. All right, here we are at 501 Garrard. A beautiful home. It was actually the home of quite a few pretty important people in Covington. It was actually built by John P. Ernst, who, if you're familiar with the house at 401 Garrard, that was his brother's house. The other Ernst house was also a hotel for a while too, but we can thank him for this lovely piece of architecture. So yes, 501 Garrard was built by Covington native and president of the Northern Bank of Kentucky, John P. Ernst. He purchased the lot from Sarah Ann Lawson in 1882, and the house was built right after that, pretty much, 1883, 1884-ish. According to the National Register nomination for the entire historic district, the house is believed, though I haven't found total proof, that it was actually designed by famous architect Samuel Hannaford, which you might know of Music Hall of Fame and the Cincinnati Observatory, and there's a lovely bunch of townhouses on Greenup that are also of the same group or person. 618 Garrard isn't quite as grand by comparison of a couple of the others we've already looked at, but it has a pretty compelling story. In the late hours of the 22nd of January 1922, Harry Lee and his family were headed home to 618 Garrard. The Lees operated the Strand Theater on Pike Street in Covington, where their son Morris worked as the manager. Just after 11 p.m., 25-year-old Morris drove the family across town with his father next to him and sister and mother in the back seat. The curtains of the vehicle were drawn against the chill of the night, allowing the car that trailed them all the way home to go unnoticed. Morris pulled to the curb in front of the Brigatalianate duplex to drop off his sister and mother. He and his father remained in the car so they could be put in the garage for the night, which you can see there's a garage right around the corner. Mrs. Lee held possession of a satchel containing the day's receipts. Like I said, they ran the theater, so they had to cash out at the end of the night. And she had about $300 with her, which in today's money is a little over $4,000. So she hops out of the car with a bag full of cash. And as she walked toward the house, which of course couldn't have been a very long walk, a man appeared from the car that had followed them home and approached her, twirling a revolver and demanding that she stop. Frightened, Mrs. Lee ran away from the man, and her daughter, who of course got out of the car when she did, tried to intercept him. The man pushed the young woman aside, stepped toward the Lee car, and fired one shot through the driver's side curtain. The single shot sent a bullet through Morris Lee's left cheek and into his brain, killing him instantly. Empty-handed, the assailant fled back to the car, which quickly sped away. So after an investigation, which was of course covered very well in the papers, they decided to take Isaiah McKnight, James Powers, and George Sanders to trial, and they were convicted for the murder of Lee. Lee's Garrard Street neighbor, Ori Ware, whose house we spoke about earlier, who lived at 501 Garrard, served as the Commonwealth attorney for the prosecution. Only Powers, of the three men, was sentenced to death by electrocution, which was carried out in June of 1923 at the Kentucky State Penitentiary in Eddyville. This one in particular is called the Rugby, here at 622 Sanford. Since its construction in the 1840s, 622 Sanford Street, now known as the Rugby, has served as both a place of learning and a private residence. The structure originally housed Reverend William Orr's Covington Female Seminary. Henry Bruce Jr., a Covington businessman, purchased the property for use as a family home in 1853. John Roebling, designer of the bridge that now bears his name, the suspension bridge, was invited to stay with the Bruce family in 1856. During the Civil War, Matilda Withers acquired the home, and her daughter, Sally Withers Bruce Morris, say that 3 times fast, former student in the female seminary and widow of the Confederate financier Eli Bruce, retained ownership until 1907. On April 16, 1868, the remains of Confederate General John Hunt Morgan lay in repose. The Rugby name was bestowed upon the house when the Rugby School moved there in 1898. The school closed in 1906 and the property was sold soon after. And for much of the 20th century, the building served as apartments, but it is now fully restored as condominiums.